Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of A Mic on the Podium with me, Michael Seal. In a change to the normal introduction, I want today to ask you a favour. The podcast has gained a very loyal following, with downloads and listeners well above average, and it's even been added to the National Sound Archive at the British Library. It would be wonderful if more people got to hear about the podcast, and you can help by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Over 42% of all of the 27,000 downloads so far have come from Apple, and leaving a rating and review there really helps the podcast gain traction and visibility, and really helps it reach a wider and bigger audience. I would appreciate your help, and thank you for being such loyal listeners. Today, I conduct a conversation with a conductor who was born and studied in New Zealand before leaving to study in America. Her career has seen her conduct all over the world and led her to have title positions in both the US and Canada. Since making this interview, she has won the Sir George Schulte Conducting Award for 2021. It's a real pleasure to welcome Gemma New. Gemma, it's lovely to speak to you today.
Oh, it's amazing to speak to you too, Mike. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you, especially because we're on the opposite sides of the world as I speak to you today. You're in New Zealand, I'm in the UK, so there's a 12 or 13 hour time difference, and not only that, for listeners later on when this episode is released, it's bonfire night. So if you hear fireworks going off in the background, it's bonfire night or Guy Fawkes night in the UK. So Gemma, if you hear lots of banging going on, I'm not being attacked, it's just people outside letting off fireworks.
Awesome. Well, I'll ask the first very English question. How's the weather there?
It's okay. It's just getting cold. That's all. It's getting very wintry, and it's a lot more depressing to be. For today's the first day of the second lockdown, so it's a lot more depressing to be inside than it was the first time, which was March, and we had unseasonably hot weather. So, maybe being inside might be a bit tougher this time. We'll see.
Well, I hope it passes quickly. We're going into summer, so I've got a lovely view of the airport. I'm in the quarantine airport hotel in Christchurch.
That sounds so romantic. Well, perfect timing then, if you're in quarantine, for me to ask you all sorts of things, such as music. When did it first come into your life? I think I read somewhere that you're from quite a musical family. Was it predestined that you would go into music, or was it something that you sort of wandered into?
It's something that I definitely wanted to do for myself. My mum plays violin, and she still plays as a keen amateur musician. And when I was 5 years old, I started playing the violin as well, and playing in orchestras. When I first got the opportunity to do that when I was 9, I just fell in love with orchestral music and the concept of an orchestra, that community feeling, and just all of the narratives and the characters that come out of the music. I was fascinated with it from the get-go. And then my dad is an actuary, so I was also very interested in mathematics and physics, and I did continue with that when I went to university, did a double degree for at least 4 years, and then music. It became clear that was the path I was going to take.
You've already said a sentence that always gets me thinking, because I used to be a violinist as well. I was a professional for 23 years before I went to conducting. I realized quite recently that actually the violin was my way into the thing that I actually loved, the orchestra. I love playing the violin, but I never thought of it as the be-all and end-all. I thought orchestra. Eventually, I've realised that orchestras were the thing I was really in love with. Were you much the same in hindsight, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I didn't really like playing by myself so much, publicly speaking. When you had a performance, I always loved it being a team effort, and orchestra definitely lended towards that. And I think the violin is such a crucial part of the orchestra. We get to play, the melody, and like almost all time when we're in the first violin part, and then when we're in the second violins, we get that beautiful middle writing accompaniment, that support, and so I just became fascinated with how the parts were all put together. And as I got the opportunity to conduct when I was at high school, and that's when I realized I really wanted to pursue conducting if it was possible.
Yeah, you're right about, I mean, I was a second fiddle player for 23 years, and how composers write for the violins. Personally, I found it fascinating then, and I think it's a real bonus that I was a fiddle player when I come to look at a score and learn scores, because I'm a string player. I never understand how people who have never even had a lesson on a string player can talk to the strings in an orchestra. Do you think the same?
Well, I'm sure they have other experiences that help them have this leadership role. But you're right. I mean, half of the orchestra, or even more than that often, is the string section. And there's a certain, I think, maybe psychology of the string player. And, you have that maybe safety in numbers at times, and the idea of just a language of a communication that is string speak, and it does help a lot to be able to communicate to strings, just knowing that that's the way they feel most comfortable, whereas perhaps with a woodwind section or a brass section, you need to give more of a general comment, something that gives a character or a scene, and they will use their own prowess on their instruments to make that happen. Whereas with strings, I think you need to be a lot more specific about where in the bow it is, and why that really matters, and where things may tend to rush. Having that knowledge from playing a string instrument, I think it really helps.
Moving on, you studied higher education in New Zealand, Wellington first, and then Christchurch, University of Canterbury as well. And I read that you conducted the Christchurch Youth Orchestra when you were only 19 years old, which is an amazing thing to do. How did that come about? How did it start? Were you already having lessons with anybody, or was it just something that you were doing literally off your own bat?
Yeah, absolutely. So I might backtrack a little bit. I got the first opportunity to conduct when I was 15.
Oh, great.
I was at high school. There were a lot of orchestras and music groups at my school. And so I think the teacher saw that I was really interested. I was concertmaster, and a teacher was leaving, so we made a performance for her. And just from that first moment of conducting, I thought, I'm so fascinated with the way the lines come together, and how the communication and rehearsal brings this piece alive. And so I was sure that I wanted to investigate a career in conducting, and the school was very supportive. So we actually started an orchestra there that very year, and I had 2 years of conducting an orchestra at the high school. And then when I started at university, there was also a supportive teacher in Wellington who said, when I transferred to Christchurch, call the conductor of the youth orchestra, Rupert Bond. He's a friend of mine, and he's really great. So I did, and I said, can I watch your rehearsals? And I went, and he said, can you conduct the beginning of Brahms 4? And I did. And actually 2 weeks later, he called and he said, I'm leaving. I'm going back to the UK. I need to go back suddenly. And I've suggested to their management that you should be considered for the role of conductors. So that happened very suddenly. Luckily, I think they had they were quite smart. I think they had a conductor in Australia who would come a little later in the rehearsal period, who would then conduct the second half of the concerts. But I would do the preliminary rehearsals and then the first half of the concert. And he was a really great mentor for me. Brian Buggy was his name. And then the Christchurch Symphony was also really supportive of Tom Woods, their music director. I said again, can I watch your rehearsals? He said, sure thing. It happened to be Il Trovatore, and on the second day they said, we need a conductor for these rehearsals because we've double booked the orchestra rehearsals with the staging. Do you know this opera? And I spent 3 days learning the opera, didn't get much sleep, and then just conducted, and he allowed me to be his assistant for all the time until I went to the United States.
Wow, I mean, that's amazing that, well, it's not amazing because, you know, there are so many nice people out there who will let you come and watch rehearsals, but then what is amazing is that they gave you a chance so quickly and so eagerly. You know, not every person is like that, and I think, you know, you were so lucky to find such kind and generous people, and also, as you said, you know, be in the right place at the right time when one of them went back to the UK, and then, you know, you got a double booking. But isn't that wonderful that they were willing to nurture potential at that stage?
I was absolutely blown away. I mean, I'm so grateful that they just, I maybe believed in me a little bit, and also, you know, just supported me. They took so much time out of their schedule to go over conducting technique and score study. And yeah, I really want to pass it on when I have the opportunity, because it changed my life, literally.
You just mentioned going to leaving and going to the United States, and you studied at the Peabody Institute, and I've read that you named 2 conducting teachers there. Neither name has appeared on the podcast, I believe, so far, so I'm really interested to know what you learnt from Gustav Meyer and Markand Thakkar, if that's how you pronounce it. 2 teachers I don't know anything about. Were you taught by them at the same time, concurrently, alongside each other? And was one of them very much into stick technique and the other one into score study, or was it an overall holistic approach? How did they go about it?
I thought both of the teachers were absolutely stellar. And so Gustav Meyer did 2/3 of the classes, Markand Thakkar did 1/3, and they were completely opposites.
Brilliant.
I mean, in the way that they believed in the philosophy of music and also conducting technique, which I found incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
So, you know, I feel like conducting, you have to have a little toolbox, and you keep adding tools of communication and so both of these philosophies of conducting technique I've been able to pull out of that toolbox at different times for when it's needed. So Gustav Meyer believed that you must show everything. And Markand Thakkar was like, you must be the music, don't show it. So already you have something incredibly different. Gustav Meyer said the Ictus is incredibly vital. Always there must be an Ictus, well, not always, but, you know, a lot. And Markand said the opposite. So I mean, really, it was wonderful. You know, with Gustav Meyer, we would get there prepared with 3 symphonies and 2 overtures, and with Markand, he wanted you to have one movement and have memorized it. And if you hadn't memorized the music that you'd prepared for Markand, he would close your score. And if you were then flailing a little bit, he would say, how long is it going to take you to learn this piece? Half an hour, an hour? Go and learn it. And I thought that was a valuable lesson. You know, we learn, it's going to take a lifetime to learn this repertoire, to go deeper and deeper in the layers. But when you're under pressure, you have to know what is most vital and what is important to the rehearsal time, to be efficient with that, and what to prioritize in the score, what you really need to know and what you need to make a decision about. And I thought he was helpful with that. But then with Meyer, he said it takes an hour a page to learn a score.
Wow.
And so you'd go into this micro detail of every single note. What does it mean and how to show it? And that was also incredibly important. And so when you have those 3 symphonies and 2 overtures and you've had a week to prepare them, he changes the repertoire every week. You would get there and most people, when he said, oh, who wants to start? You'd put your hand up immediately because you know at least you're going to start at the beginning. Because otherwise he'd just go, all right, let's swap now. It just randomly in any piece. And you'd have to be ready to get into the zone and to have a good opinion about that part of it. So yeah, it was incredibly valuable.
You mentioned one word, and the minute you mentioned it, I remembered that I'd read his book, Gustav Meyr's book. I can't remember what it's called, as I'm not going to get up out of my chair and look and see what it's called. But the word ictus immediately made me remember, yes, I've read that book. Can you explain to the listeners what he means by ictus? Because to me, it's not an everyday word. What did he mean by that?
Well, I mean, it's an impulse, and it's a preparation for the orchestra before the actual time that they play. And it's, I would say it's almost like an electric shock. It's got to be quite vigorous and it gives a lot of preparation and breath for the player to then know exactly when it comes back down where that point is going to be in time, so that they know when to play.
Yeah, he spends a lot of time in the book talking about it. But the one thing I didn't get out of the book was, or I didn't remember, was spending an hour a page. I mean, you know, you would hope that if you get 3 symphonies, 2 overtures, and a concerto, whatever you just said, you would hope that one of them wasn't a sort of, 60 or 70-minute massive, Shostakovich symphony that you've got to spend an hour a page on, because there ain't enough time in the week to learn that. How did you manage that?
It's very overwhelming. It's very overwhelming. I mean, I would go to bed at 3 a.m. regularly. So yeah, I mean, I did work incredibly hard beginning, and he shows how to, structure helps a lot. Because especially if something's in sonata form, for example, you look at one phrase and you analyze it, and then you see when, a similar phrase or the theme returns and what the differences are. And that helps you remember, and those contrasts maybe bring it to a more natural understanding of the journey that it's taking, no matter what piece it is. But he also said an interesting point that 90% of the time when something goes wrong in the music, in the orchestra while they're playing the music, it's your fault. And that also, it was a wonderful, it's obviously a negative way of thinking, but it also brings up a lot of questions which we can then unfold and find ways to solve problems, which I do enjoy.
Yeah. I'm going to go slightly off the beaten track here because, as I said, and dear listeners, I do my homework. I happened to watch a short film or an interview that was made about you or with you, and it talked about the fact that, as you said, you also did a double or triple major, and you were doing maths and physics, and it talked about the fact that you use algebra sometimes to learn and remember scores. I mean, I'm not a mathematician, so to me that blows my mind that you would use algebra. But do you still use that a lot now in score studies? And how do you think it's helped you? I think you mentioned that it was to do with memorizing things. How do you think you still use your maths training now?
So, I mean, algebra is just a way of explaining things, and it could explain anything really in the world if you just put things relative to other things, right? So for me, I've found especially proof theory, which is the way of proving something through logic, the way that they use algebra, especially with that, I found that incredibly helpful, because it goes line by line. You just go down the page, saying, you start with a statement, the oboe is playing, and but what is going on? Why is it there? How are we going to fix any problems that might happen, or what decisions are we going to make for this? What are the possible decisions, and what is the one that you're going to start with, and what might be your plan B and C? So there's, a lot of logical analysis that one does anyway with score study, and no matter who you are. And then I think writing it down for me always helps me internalize it. So when I use algebra, I'm just shorthanding it, and I guess laying it out on a page, which is similar to proof theory, but it's just making it look presentable visually, something that I can then naturalize in my own body and understanding, and go, yes, that's how the piece goes. That makes sense to me, and then it helps me memorize it.
Well, I may well come back to that when I come to the question I ask every conductor, which is how they learn a score and whether they mark things in. So I shall file that away and ask again, whether you add certain things in when you come to learn score. While we're still at Peabody, you founded the Lunar Ensemble, which I believe was a mainly contemporary music ensemble. Starting an ensemble, it's a big undertaking, but it's definitely a way of making sure that you conduct more. Did you, from the start, want to concentrate on contemporary music? And how much help did you get from other people as well?
Well, I always think any orchestra and ensemble is a team effort, and this definitely was. The Lunar Ensemble was a group that I co-founded with other Peabody musicians, Peabody students, and we first off just really wanted to play Pierrot Lunaire, and we ended up performing it 10 times in our 6 seasons. And we also, there's a whole lot of other poems that are linked that Schoenberg didn't choose for his Pierrot Lunaire. So we asked composers to then write music for these other poems, and it happened to be in the anniversary of Pierrot Lunaire's composing, so 100 years. So that was, it just worked out very nicely, and we were able to collaborate with quite a few universities around the USA, and it was very exciting. We also did L'Histoire du Soldat, and some contemporary compositions that were of the same instrumentation. And I really like working with composers because you can always ask them questions. What did you mean here? And, what message are you trying to give this audience? And it's always fascinating the way they have their own unique personal language. And it's there's always something new that I love, especially when someone has a very unique style. It brings a whole new world, a whole new sound world, and I find that really inspiring. Just this music is music of our time, and it's very relevant to our society and today. So I think it's incredibly important, but it's actually really moving for me and for our audiences to hear this music of our time, because it touches our lives.
Wouldn't it be nice to go back and ask Brahms or Bruckner what they thought? I've often thought that. I mean, when I would, do music.
What did you mean by this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, wouldn't it be lovely? I mean, that, as you say, it's a bonus of working with composers who are with you, and you're poring over their score with them. It's such a bonus. Yeah, the amount of times I've wished I could just get on the phone and ask Beethoven, what did you mean here? And by the way, did your metronome work or not? And other such questions. At this point, Gemma asked me a question that stemmed from something she'd been told at Peabody by one of her teachers about phrasing and how to shape a phrase in all music. The question was quite tricky, and if you want to hear my answer, as well as a short discussion we had about phrasing, spontaneity in performance, and freedom through rehearsing, I've turned it into a Patreon-exclusive bonus companion mini-episode. To hear that discussion, as well as all of the previous bonus mini-episodes, let alone all of the other things to be gained by subscribing that you've already heard about in the introduction, please head over to patreon.com/A Mic on the Podium, and for just £5 a month, you gain access to a treasure trove of content. Details are in the show notes below, and it's quick and easy to join. Now, back to the interview. You leave Peabody in 2011, and immediately, or around the same time in 2011, you become assistant of the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra. Assistant conductor jobs, I on here have said that I think they're wonderful things, especially if you have a relationship with a music director. You're not just making cups of coffee and putting the bowings in, that you sit in rehearsals, you're an absorbent sponge. How was that time for you? You were there 5 years at New Jersey Symphony Orchestra.
I had a wonderful time with the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra musicians and also their music director, Jacques Lacombe, who was a conductor I met in New Zealand when he conducted the National Youth Orchestra. And I tapped him on the shoulder very shyly one time and said, "Can I look over some scores and with you? I have very specific questions. I'll take maybe 5 minutes of your time." And he said, "Sure." We never actually got to do that. But the next day he said, "Oh, I want to sit in the hall and listen to the balance. Does anyone conduct?" And my friends were like, "Gemma, go on." So I got to conduct Firebird and a bit of all the pieces as we toured the country for sound checks. And he was incredibly supportive in writing a letter of support for me to go to Peabody. And then he became music director of the New Jersey Symphony. I started covering while I was still studying at Peabody. I would go up for a week at a time, just a little bit as was allowed. And then the job opened up as assistant conductor, and I did the audition, and it did go well. And I had a wonderful time with this NJSO family. The musicians are so generous and thoughtful and sweet and kind, and also incredibly good. I loved the orchestra. It was amazing, responsibility, and it was an honor. And so, the orchestra travels a lot. We would always go on a bus for hours at a time together, and we would eat meals together. So I did become very close with them. And musically speaking, wow, I mean, there was a lot of repertoire that we went through, and I would make notes for myself as I was in the hall. I would observe everything and take note in shorthand in my own score. And then I would, Jacques was always asking what the balance was, and we would talk about, where the tricky sections were and things like that. So it was also really helpful for that critical analysis of okay, we start with this first rehearsal, and what do we observe, and then how do we make things better?
I think I've said it before, but I think unless you spend a lot of time, as I did as a player in Sargent Orchestra, the best way of learning what an orchestra is like is to be an assistant. And as you say, join the family, get on a bus, get in a coffee queue, have meals with them, ask them the questions that, you're not going to get the answers to at your university or at your music college. I've even had conductors on here who've won prestigious competitions but then gone on to just be an assistant when they could have gone and traveled the world having been a competition winner. I think it's such an amazing way of doing it, and for any young conductor, it's the best thing, I think, personally.
And also what's really great as well is that you have to do a lot of family and education programs. And I'm saying that because you have to speak to the audience and engage a whole bunch of young people. And also you have to quickly go from one piece to another, because they're only 5 minutes long, these pieces, and they're all different tempos, all different styles. And that's really great training.
Yeah. Some of the hardest concerts you ever have to conduct are those family or schools concerts, as you said, because you could do 12 pieces of different genres, all full of little corners to conduct, starts and stops, and you by the time you stop being assistant and you get an overture, a concerto, and a symphony, it feels really rather easy to some degree. Don't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And pops is like that as well. I mean, when you try to, you have all these short pieces and you have to get through them all within that 2.5 hour rehearsal. And there's only one rehearsal on the day, there's a lot of pressure in that, a lot of moving parts, and something could go bananas quite easily with the piano keyboard with the software not working, or the singer, the mics aren't working, or something, the movie's not working. So, it also encourages patience.
Yeah, it certainly does. I think we've all been there. During that 5-year period, you did also spend 1 year doing the Dolebel conducting fellow at the Los Angeles Phil. Who did you get to assist and view whilst you were doing that? And when you came to work with Gustavo Dudamel, what was the program? And was it a good year? I mean, I think you only go 2 or 3 times, don't you? But how was it for you?
Yeah, so with the New Jersey Symphony, I do want to point out, because I think this is actually quite unusual for North American orchestras at the moment. They were incredibly flexible with, if I said, LA just called and it's coming up in a week's time. This is what happened when I first got invited to be a cover conductor. It's happening in a week's time. It's an amazing opportunity. Would you mind if I stepped out of assisting for a week with the New Jersey Symphony? And they said, yes, absolutely. But I do feel like with some other assistant roles in North America, they would say, no, you have to be there 3 out of the 4 weeks per month, and I think it restricts a lot of young conductors from just taking these opportunities. So I'm grateful to NJSO for that. But so actually, I had a year of covering the LA Phil, and I did it a lot because I had this flexibility, and then did a year of the Dolebel Fellowship, and then I actually continued to cover in the year after. About 4 months, no, sorry, probably 3 months of the year, I was in LA. And so every year it was awesome. I mean, Hollywood Bowl in the summer, the Walt Disney Concert Hall, they gave me, I think, 9 concerts of all these different programs. And there was very interesting, very involved programs, including film and young composers and new music and the New World Symphony and things like that. And then, yes, there was Gustavo Dudamel, who I was able to assist a lot. I think I did maybe 18 weeks with him over 3 years. And then Esa-Pekka Salonen and also John Adams. I really respect and admire all 3 of them. And also some really, really great guest conductors who came through. I was able to make that week, and it made all the difference. There was a lot of repertoire that we went through, especially in the Hollywood Bowl season. I think they do 2 to 3 programs per week, and you have to be ready, and that was very exciting.
Well, that's the big thing, isn't it? 2 or 3 programs a week. You're talking to somebody who lives in the UK. I know all about that, or we do, and sometimes 4 programs. Looking ahead, just after all of this, or maybe before it all finished, I see a lot of air miles coming up. Is all I'll say. Is the fact that you become you're named as music director of the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra back home in 2015, starting in 16 and going through till 2021. But then you've got resident conductor in St. Louis and also principal guest conductor with Dallas Symphony Orchestra. How were New Jersey and LA with you going back to New Zealand, and now you're music director in New Zealand? How are the I suppose you have to manage your time very carefully and think, well, I'll probably do a patch in America for a month and then come back to New Zealand for a month. And how does it work at the moment? Because as I said, you must have one hell of an air miles account.
Well, you pick up on quite a humorous point, because there is a city in New Zealand that is called Hamilton. The musical Hamilton in New York City. Yeah. And then there is the Hamilton Philharmonic in Hamilton, Ontario in Canada, which is just outside of Toronto. and that's where I'm music director.
Oh, well, in that case, I should have pressed the link on Wikipedia. I just naturally assumed it was the one back home. I put New Zealand and Hamilton together and came up with 5 rather than 4, didn't I?
No, it's all right. In America, I often get people thinking I do the Broadway musical. So,
oh, right. Well, yeah. Oh, no, I hadn't gone down that road. Definitely not. Oh, well, in that case, well, still, I would imagine as I'm speaking to you right now in New Zealand, there are still some air miles to be done. But so, yeah, you're in Canada. I shall leave all of this in, make myself look an absolute fool.
Not at all. Not at all. I think it's quite funny.
Well, it does lead.
There's a lot of travel involved, for sure.
Yeah, it does lead on to another point, though, that because, if you look at your biography on your website or anywhere else, you do travel around anyway. And what I really wanted to ask you was about, you're lucky enough to have your job in Hamilton, Ontario, and your job in Dallas, but you do work in Europe and you do work in lots of other places, and you've done a lot of first dates. And it's a subject that comes up periodically on here about how you cope with first dates, especially if you've had to travel a long way to get there. Do you have a strategy? How have you got on with first dates? I mean, it's part of what we do. We all enjoy them. But, are you like me still nervous as you walk into the hall for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's so different from a long-term relationship with an orchestra, as you say. I mean, I feel St. Louis, Dallas, Hamilton, and in the past, obviously New Jersey, LA, you create a family, and there's support and trust built over many weeks of working together, and success as well. So, and also I think, especially as music director, you have this artistic vision that you plan with your team and you see it realized. It's incredibly satisfying work. With a new beginning, you're meeting a new friend for the first time, a new organization. And you, no matter who you've talked to about the orchestra beforehand, you don't really know exactly what you're getting into. And so I come with being as prepared as possible with the music at hand and with an open mind and a very positive outlook. And I listen very carefully, especially in the first rehearsal. And I try to be maybe even overly clear in the first rehearsal in certain passages to make people feel a little bit, okay, I can rely on her for that, or, things like that. But also to, as I said, when you're listening, you don't want to necessarily be in the way, because you're hearing the voice of the orchestra and their style. And, some orchestras you go and you're like, wow, that is a tradition right there. And what I had in mind with this piece is not possibly going to work for this. But luckily, I have thought about 10 different options of how it could go, and I'm going to go to this next plan. So definitely it's taking it all in, and it's always a conversation between the players and yourself, not always in words, obviously. It's with more subtle communications, and hopefully over the week, if you focus on the music at hand and the task that we have as a team, it rises to the top, and we find that we have very satisfying performance on the day of the concert.
Well, yeah, you basically encapsulated how I think personally, and it's that going in there, you put the first beat down, you don't know what's going to come at you, and you're probably listening harder then than you do at certain points later in the week, even, because you want to know how they respond. And you mentioned tools as a conductor. It can be verbal tools to get what you want. It can be a gesture that you think, well, I would normally use this gesture. That didn't work. Right, I'll see what else I've got in the tool bag, whether I can, and it's being alive, isn't it? It's being alive to all of the situations, listening, reacting. And the one thing for me is being myself. I wouldn't, I'd just be me. But whilst listening very hard.
Yes, absolutely. No pretenses.
No.
you know, we love music. That's why we're there, and that's a very good reason to perform and to be musician. And you know, we're working as hard as we possibly can to do the best job possible. So I think that if you come prepared, you're on the good foot.
Earlier on, we were discussing about learning scores and the fact that you use algebra. It may or may not be part of the answer that's to the next question. I ask every conductor this. When you come to learn a new score, do you have a set method? Do you just sit down at your desk and start at page one or work your way through? Do you stick to Gustav Meier's an hour a page? Or do you look at it a much bigger picture and zero in on certain details? And when you learn a score, or when you go through this process, are you like me, somebody who scribbles lots of ideas, thoughts in, and I use red, blue, and black? Or are you like about 50% of the other conductors I've interviewed? Are you one of those people who just remembers it and doesn't write anything in? What's your usual modus operandi?
Yeah, my score is very meticulously marked, and I have a really specific system of marking up the score. And it's not that you just have to mark it up. There's so much more involved with it, and that brings an understanding for me, and brings me to decisions and things like that. So and I use color. Obviously, first I start with pencil, and I look at the structure, I look at the harmony of the instrumentation, I make sure the score is I usually put, it depends on what the piece is, but like I mark it so that I can do some really quick referencing in rehearsal in terms of like very simple things like bar numbers, transpositions, meters, tempos, and movements, and where in the movement, if it's sonata form or something, or another form. And then I also write in a lot of notes of the character, of the phrase shape. With dynamics, I put them in a dark blue. Main cues are in a deep red. Secondary cues are in an orange. Main lines are filled with yellow. Bass line or rhythmic unit, fastest rhythmic unit or percussive is a light green. Light blue is either a third line of a counter melody, or it's if it's not a filled out part, it's an edit that I've made, a conscious decision that isn't printed in the score, but I've made a decision that this note is staccato, for example, and it's previously been a long tenuto line. I will put that in a light blue so that I know I've made that decision. It's not the score. So I use a lot of colors, but obviously I don't use them all the time. It's only when it's needed. Dark green is for meters and tempo changes, but if there's a lot of both of those, I'll use dark purple. And if there's some structural points, or some, like if you're recording a piece and you have to make some like really structurally cut blocks, or something like that, I will use dark purple for that as well. Yeah, and I write in all the harmony. I always write in, because I painstakingly play it on the piano and put in the harmony like as I play it, and that helps me kind of structure the energy of the phrase and what the phrase shape will be.
Well, like me, you use colours, but you use a lot more different colours. But again, you're meticulous. I think I'm assuming that the process of marking a score is really helps you learn it. That's why I do it. The going through that process, I remember writing things in. I remember the physical action of writing things in, or notes that, and when it comes to performance, that I know it's there. It's like an old friend. It's like a Bible or a manual, electricity guide, a circuit board. And whilst other conductors don't do this. What it proves is that we all have our own system, and as long as we can stand up there at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning and at 7:30 on a Thursday night and do our jobs, and we've got it in our head, it works, doesn't it? It doesn't matter what the system is.
Well, I do have to say, last summer, I meticulously studied this score and was on a red eye to the orchestra rehearsal in the morning. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I realized that I'd left the score in the seat pocket of the plane.
Oh God! Oh no! That's for me. That would be a nightmare. Yeah.
I went to the reception, and luckily it was an IMSLP score, so I just printed it off, and the librarians bound it in the morning. But and I very quickly just wrote a few pencil markings. But it showed me that that process of marking for me helps it internalize, and I actually don't really need it once I've got that visual image in my head to remember, and then I can use a different score, and it doesn't really matter, luckily.
Well, I mean, that would be a nightmare for any of us who mark up our scores. But as you've just said, and it brings up another very quick point, and I know some conductors who've said this who like us, to varying degrees, write things in. A lot of them are rebuying their scores and starting afresh, and when they do, they write less in, and maybe that's because, like you and I, when we do it the first time, we write a lot in, and it helps us learn it. As you said, you could probably visualize what you'd written in on that red-eye flight the next day with an absolutely clean score. Well,
it's funny you should say it, because Schumann 3 is a work that I got about 3 scores for, have rewritten, or just, started afresh, as you said.
Yeah.
And just finished marking up the set of parts for the second time. And it's been like a year since I looked at the parts, and it took a lot longer this time to edit the parts because I changed my mind about so many things. and so, it shows, like, is there a perfect phrase to something? Well, maybe, of course, it's not. We're always you're trying to find the best way possible. And yes, you said every orchestra is very different, but also maybe you mature as a musician over time, and that's a wonderful thing.
Gemma, it's 10 questions time. So I shall start with, what sound or noise do you love, and what sound or noise do you hate?
I love happy dogs barking. That's one of my favorite sounds. It makes me feel very happy as well. And I hate the sound of my alarm clock in the morning.
Well, sorry then. Seeing as it's evening here and morning there, I got you out of bed to do the interview.
Yes, thank you very much.
And happy dogs barking. I think you're the first person to have said that. So, brilliant answer. If you had 24 hours free, what would you spend it doing?
I love hiking in the mountains. Anything that has a good view, I'd go pursue that.
Who would be a favourite conductor of yesteryear?
Big fan of Carlos Kleiber. I think he's really clear, and his ideas are invigorating. It's so exciting to see how he has this idea. It's so clearly portrayed, and it's so natural and free at the same time. And I just really like his style. It's very elegant and strong.
I laughed because his name just keeps cropping up. Probably once every 3 episodes, maybe even more regularly than that. And I had a message on Twitter saying, from somebody very early on when the podcast started, are they all going to say Carlos Kleiber is their favourite conductor this year? And my answer back would be, now, would you? Even if they did, maybe it's proving a point that conductors seem to really like Carlos Kleiber, and maybe he was actually that good. He's my choice as well. But, why complain about it? Obviously, he sticks out for us, doesn't he?
Yeah. If you watch the videos, you see how very clearly he presents his ideas. And then when you hear the pieces as well, they make so much sense. And I feel very moved by the performances. So, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, ditto. The next one. A lot of people complain about this question. I don't know why, but they do. And who would be a favourite current conductor?
Well, I suspect that people complain because, there are a lot of really good conductors of today, and it's hard to choose because, how can you choose? But I mean, I guess at the moment, I really admire Andres Nelson's conducting, and I think for the kind of same idea that he shows his ideas very clearly, and I think, as you said, he's very fresh with and free when he's in performance, and I really find his ideas so exciting, in the way he describes it. Sometimes it's just wow, like I never thought of that, and it's such a natural idea, and it shows the orchestra exactly how to play it, and just so simply, and then yes, in the concert it's electric, and it's something new every night, and so I'm really inspired by that at the moment.
Well, I have to say I was lucky enough to play under him for 5 years or so, and yeah, some of, if not the most exciting concerts I ever played in. And I joined the CBSO under Rattle, and did all of Sakuriomo's 10 years. So I was lucky enough to play for three incredible conductors. But I think Andrus's concerts, he could take the orchestra to places that we didn't know we could go to. It didn't always work. Sometimes we crashed
His
and burned.
imagination.
Yeah, it's imagination, and and at the time, there was there was, even when he left, there was a real trust in, if Andrew says we're going there, right, we'll go there then. We'll have some fun and we'll do it. Nobody went kicking and screaming. It was, absolutely amazing. What is the hardest work you've ever conducted?
I would have to say Berio's Voci. It's a viola concerto.
Right.
There's two orchestral groups, and one is about, I think, like 26 players who are all across the back of the stage as far as possible away in a semicircle, and then an orchestra that's in front of you, but there's no instruments placed in a normal way. So and everyone has an individual line, and so there's a lot to manage, and you have an organ in the middle, but you have three percussionists all separated, and then there's the viola soloist, and the score is notated in such a complicated fashion that you have to actually put bar numbers in and choose things. I was conducting with a baton with my right hand, but my left hand had to hold up numbers based on certain points, and there's the idea of, like, it's a really interesting piece, so you should go check it out. It's based upon Sicilian folk song, and there's recordings out there which you can hear of, like, this raw, passionate woman's voice singing these songs, these dances, and the viola is now singing this, but this is like a mystical atmosphere of the fact that there's the crowd, and they're all different people. I mean, individual, unique human beings with these musicians. So he had a good concept in mind. It doesn't help that the notation is very complicated, and also the parts don't really coincide. There's a lot of typos and bars missing and things like that, so you have to figure that out. But then the viola part repeats itself in a way that is very improvisatory, but it's actually very hard to kind of go, okay, count 1, 2, 3 up to 23, and then we move suddenly. So and it's free, so you don't know how quick or slow it's going to go, and it's a nightmare.
You've just basically described a traffic cop with the hearing of a bat, who's got about 8 tentacles to hold up various numbers and letters. Though it sounds fascinating. I mean, I know, having done his folk songs, and I think there's a Sicilian folk song in that set he wrote for his wife, that the music is amazing. So I will go and look it up, definitely, as I have with all of the hardest pieces.
What's weird is I think I'd do it again if I had the opportunity, because you had to work so hard to have it happen, and I'd just like to have another go. And I think the audience would enjoy the piece.
When traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
A suitcase.
That's a good cheat. Nobody's come up with that one, but it's a good one.
No, you know what I will tell you is maybe more unique to me.
Yes.
Is that I have managed to lose a lot of things while traveling, and
Right.
I think I've got better. But every time, as I said, I lost a score.
Yeah.
That's not the first time I've done that. And headphones are a common occurrence. Computers, phones, and passports I have lost on travel itineraries. So multiple times as well. Luckily, I think maybe 2/3 of the items I do get back, and I'm getting better.
Well, I'll let you off your answer of a suitcase, because actually nobody else has come up with that answer. And I can't remember whether the listeners know this or not, but the answers passport, baton, phone, score, iPad, computer, whatever, are banned. Then you're not allowed to give those answers. So a suitcase is the best get out clause I've heard yet, and is immediately going on my banned list. So well done, Gemma. Right. Well done. That's brilliant. Oh, excellent. Makes me laugh. Next one. What is the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
I mean, I think I would go with, I think it's really hard to strike a balance of personal life and work life as a conductor, and the idea that we are forever traveling, and even if we have these orchestral families, it's not a tenured position. It's very free and on the go. And there's so many exciting things about that. I mean, we have a creative career, and I'm always learning every day and seeing so many wonderful people and places and learning all this new repertoire. But I think it's also important to be grounded, and so I mean, what I would change is possibly, I don't have a solution, but finding a way to have a balance so that one can be more grounded as a conductor. That's a fantasy.
Well, yeah, as you say, it's one of those grass is always greener things, isn't it? When you're on the road and you wish to be back home, being grounded and having some time at home, and then the minute you're at home, you're thinking, why am I not out there conducting in Buenos Aires or in Germany or in China or Japan? Why am I not out there flying around the world? Yeah, it's what I wonder whether all conductors are like that. I know I am. I get away on a 2 or 3 week trip and think, I really wish I was back home now. And then I get home, and within 2 weeks, I wish I was back on the road again.
Yeah, you get hot feet.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I'm not sure. I love animals, so maybe I just start looking after puppies or something. I don't know. Or maybe go back into mathematics if I was going to be looking for a professional career that's different. But I probably, when I was younger and I was 12 years old, I made the decision I always wanted to be a part of an orchestra, and that to me is most important. I'm so invigorated by it, inspired by what orchestras do when they perform in harmony with a message that moves people emotionally and transforms them in a positive way. So maybe, I just have a different job as being part of the orchestra.
Good. That's having been both sides of the fence, I think that's perfectly allowable. A player and a conductor, if there is a fence, I don't think there is one, but a lot of people see one. But yeah, absolutely. Being around orchestras is a wonderful privilege and joy. Final question. If the world were to end tonight, what would be your choice of final meal and drink?
Well, I should start off by saying I'm very easy to please with any kind of meal. But if I had a choice, it would be a roast chicken dinner and a piece of hot apple pie with a scoop of ice cream.
And to wash it down?
Oh, good cider, dry cider.
Oh, now nobody's mentioned cider before. And some wonderful answers, Gemma. Yeah, lovely cider. Especially, as you said, you're about to go into summer. Cider is a real summer drink for me.
Yeah, I love it. And there's lots of good ciders in England.
Yeah, loads of good ciders. The cloudy ones, the pear ones, the apple ones. Yeah, most of them are pretty darn good. Gemma, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you for the last hour. I hope that we speak to each other soon in person and not an entire globe apart from each other. But it's been wonderful to chat to you, and thank you very much.
Yeah, you too, Mike. It's been wonderful to get to know you a little bit more, and I do hope to meet you in person, hopefully very soon. You take care.
A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. Next time, I chat with a conductor who started his musical career as a professional oboist, but after stints as assistant to both George Szell and Leopold Stokowski, he went on to have positions with orchestras in New Zealand, Australia, Malaysia, Japan, South Korea, the United Kingdom, and his native Switzerland. He was also director of one of the world's most prestigious music festivals for 6 years. But until then, bye-bye.